Chapter 1. The town was in flames. The narrow streets leading to the moat and the first terrace belched smoke and embers, flames devouring the densely clustered thatched houses and licking at the castle walls. From the west, from the harbor gate, the screams and clamor of vicious battle and the dull blows of a battering ram smashing against the walls grew ever louder. Their attackers had surrounded them unexpectedly, shattering the barricades which had been held by no more than a few soldiers, a handful of townsmen carrying halberds and some crossbowmen from the guild. Their horses, decked out in flowing black caparisons, flew over the barricades like specters, their riders bright, glistening blades sowing death amongst the fleeing defenders. Ciri felt the knight who carried her before him on his saddle abruptly spur his horse. She heard his cry. "Hold on," he shouted. "Hold on." Other knights wearing the colors of Sintra overtook them, sparring, even in full light, with the Nilfgaardians. Ciri caught a glimpse of the skirmish from the corner of her eye, the crazed swirl of blue gold and black cloaks amidst the clash of steel, the clatter of blades against shields, the neighing of horses' shouts. No, not shouts. Screams. Hold on. Fear. With every jolt, every jerk, every leap of the horse pain shot through her hands as she clutched at the reins. Her legs contracted painfully, unable to find support, her eyes watered from the smoke. The arm around her suffocated her, choking her, the torse compressing her ribs. All around her screaming such as she had never before heard grew louder. What must one do to a man to make him scream so? Fear. Overpowering, paralyzing, choking fear. Again the clash of iron, the grunts and snorts of the horses. The houses whirled around her and suddenly she could see windows belching fire where a moment before there'd been nothing but a muddy little street strewn with corpses and cluttered with the abandoned possessions of the fleeing population. All at once the knight at her back was racked by a strange wheezing cough. Blood spurted over the hands grasping the reins. More screams. Arrows whistled past. A fall, a shock, painful bruising against armor. Hoofs pounded past her, a horse's belly and a frayed girth flashing by above her head, then another horse's belly and a flowing black caparison. Grunts of exertion, like a lumberjack's when chopping wood. But this isn't wood, it's iron against iron. A shout, muffled and dull, and something huge and black collapsed into the mud next to her with a splash, spurting blood. An armored foot quivered, thrashed, goring the earth with an enormous spur. A jerk. Some force plucked her up, pulled her onto another saddle. Hold on. Again the bone-shaking speed, the mad gallop, arms and legs desperately searching for support. The horse rears. There is no. Hold on. There is no support. There is no. There is blood. The horse falls. It's impossible to jump aside, no way to break free, to escape the tight embrace of these chainmail-clad arms. There is no way to avoid the blood pouring onto her head and over her shoulders. A jolt, the squelch of mud, a violent collision with the ground, horrifically still after the furious ride. The horse's harrowing wheezes and squeals as it tries to regain its feet. The pounding of horseshoes, fetlocks and hooves flashing past. Black caparisons and cloaks, shouting. The street is on fire, a roaring red wall of flame. Silhouetted before it, a rider towers over the flaming roofs, enormous. His black caparisoned horse prances, tosses its head, neighs. The rider stares down at her. Ciri sees his eyes gleaming through the slit in his huge helmet, framed by a bird of prey's wings. She sees the fire reflected in the broad blade of the sword held in his lowered hand. The rider looks at her. Ciri is unable to move. The dead man's motionless arms wrapped around her waist hold her down. She is locked in place by something heavy and wet with blood, something which is lying across her thigh, pinning her to the ground. And she is frozen in fear, a terrible fear which turns her entrails inside out, which deafens Ciri to the screams of the wounded horse, the roar of the blaze, the cries of dying people and the pounding drums. The only thing which exists, which counts, which still has any meaning, is fear. Fear embodied in the figure of a black knight wearing a helmet decorated with feathers frozen against the wall of raging, red flames. The rider spurs his horse, the wings on his helmet fluttering as the bird of prey takes to flight, launching itself to attack its helpless victim, paralyzed with fear. The bird or maybe the knight screeches terrifyingly, cruelly, triumphantly. A black horse, black armor, a black flowing cloak, and behind this, flames, a sea of flames. Fear. The bird shrieks. The wings beat, feathers slap against her face. Fear. Help. Why doesn't anyone help me? Alone, weak, helpless, I can't move, can't force a sound from my constricted throat. Why does no one come to help me? I'm terrified. Eyes blaze through the slit in the huge winged helmet. The black cloak veils everything Ciri. She woke, numb and drenched in sweat, with her scream, the scream which had woken her, still hanging in the air, still vibrating somewhere within her, beneath her breastbone and burning against her parched throat. Her hands ached, clenched around the blanket, her back ached. Ciri. Calm down. The night was dark and windy, the crowns of the surrounding pine trees rustling steadily and melodiously, their limbs and trunks creaking in the wind. There was no malevolent fire, no screams, only this gentle lullaby. Beside her the campfire flickered with light and warmth, its reflected flames glowing from harness buckles, gleaming red in the leather-wrapped and iron-banded hilt of a sword leaning against a saddle on the ground. There was no other fire and no other iron. The hand against her cheek smelled of leather and ashes, not of blood. Geralt, it was just a dream. A bad dream. Ciri shuddered violently, curling her arms and legs up tight. A dream. Just a dream. The campfire had already died down. The birch logs were red and luminous, occasionally crackling, giving off tiny spurts of blue flame which illuminated the white hair and sharp profile of the man wrapping a blanket and sheepskin around her. Geralt, I am right here. Sleep, Ciri. You have to rest. We've still a long way ahead of us. I can hear music, she thought suddenly, amidst the rustling of the trees. There's music. Lute music, and voices. The Princess of Cintra, a child of destiny, a child of elder blood, the blood of elves, Geralt of Rivia, the White Wolf, and his destiny. No, that's a legend, a poet's invention. The princess is dead. She was killed in the town streets while trying to escape. Hold on. Hold. Geralt, what, Ciri? What did he do to me? What happened? What did he do to me? Who? The knight, the black knight with feathers on his helmet. I can't remember anything. He shouted. And looked at me. I can't remember what happened, only that I was frightened. I was so frightened. The man leaned over her, the flame of the campfire sparkling in his eyes. They were strange eyes, very strange. Ciri had been frightened of them. She hadn't liked meeting his gaze. But that had been a long time ago. A very long time ago. I can't remember anything, she whispered, searching for his hand, as tough and coarse as raw wood. The Black Knight, it was a dream. Sleep peacefully. It won't come back. Ciri had heard such reassurances in the past. They had been repeated to her endlessly. Many times she had been offered comforting words when her screams had woken her during the night. But this time it was different. Now she believed it. Because it was Geralt of Rivia, the White Wolf, the Witcher, who said it. The man who was her destiny. The one for whom she was destined. Geralt the Witcher, who had found her surrounded by war, death and despair, who had taken her with him and promised they would never part. She fell asleep holding tight to his hand. The bard finished the song. Tilting his head a little, he repeated the ballad's refrain on his lute, delicately, softly, a single tone higher than the apprentice accompanying him. No one said a word. Nothing but the subsiding music and the whispering leaves and squeaking boughs of the enormous oak could be heard. Then, all of a sudden, a goat tethered to one of the carts which circled the ancient tree bleated lengthily. At that moment, as if given a signal, one of the men seated in the large semicircular audience stood up. Throwing his cobalt blue cloak with gold braid trim back over his shoulder, he gave a stiff, dignified bow. "Thank you, Master Dandelion," he said, his voice resonant without being loud. "Allow me, Radcliffe of Oxenford, Master of the Arcana, to express what I am sure is the opinion of everyone here present and utter words of gratitude and appreciation for your fine art and skill." An audience of the wizard ran his gaze over those assembled, well over 100 people, seated on the ground, on carts, or standing in a tight semicircle facing the foot of the oak. They nodded and whispered amongst themselves. Several people began to applaud while others greeted the singer with upraised hands. Women, touched by the music, sniffed and wiped their eyes on whatever came to hand, which differed according to their standing, profession and wealth. Peasant women used their forearms or the backs of their hands. Merchants' wives dabbed their eyes with linen handkerchiefs, while elves and noble women used kerchiefs of the finest tight woven cotton. And Baron Villebert's 3 daughters, who had, along with the rest of his retinue, halted their falcon hunt to attend the famous troubadour's performance, blew their noses loudly and sonorously into elegant mold green cashmere scarves. "It would not be an exaggeration to say," continued the wizard, "that you have moved us deeply, Master Dandelion. You have prompted us to reflection and thought. You have stirred our hearts. Allow me to express our gratitude, and our respect." The troubadour stood and took a bow, sweeping the heron feather pin to his fashionable hat across his knees. His apprentice broke off his playing, grinned and bowed too, until Dandelion glared at him sternly and snapped something under his breath. The boy lowered his head and returned to softly strumming his lute strings. The assembly stirred to life. The merchants traveling in the caravan whispered amongst themselves and then rolled a sizable cask of beer out to the foot of the oak tree. Wizard Radcliffe lost himself in quiet conversation with Baron Villebert. Having blown their noses, the Baron's daughters gazed at Dandelion in adoration which went entirely unnoticed by the bard, engrossed as he was in smiling, winking and flashing his teeth at a haughty, silent group of roving elves, and at one of them in particular, a dark-haired, large-eyed beauty sporting a tiny ermine cap. Dandelion had rivals for her attention. The elf, with her huge eyes and beautiful torque hat, had caught his audience's interest as well, and a number of knights, students and goliards were paying court to her with their eyes. The elf clearly enjoyed the attention, picking at the lace cuffs of her chemise and fluttering her eyelashes, but the group of elves with her surrounded her on all sides, not bothering to hide their antipathy towards her admirers. The glade beneath Bleaverus, the great oak, was a place of frequent rallies, a well-known travelers' resting place and meeting ground for wanderers, and was famous for its tolerance and openness. The druids protecting the ancient tree called it the seat of friendship and willingly welcomed all comers. But even during an event as exceptional as the world-famous Troubadours' just concluded performance, the travelers kept to themselves, remaining in clearly delineated groups. Elves stayed with elves. Dwarfish craftsmen gathered with their kin, who were often hired to protect the merchant caravans and were armed to the teeth. Their groups tolerated at best the gnome miners and halfling farmers who camped beside them. All non-humans were uniformly distant towards humans. The humans repaid in kind, but were not seen to mix amongst themselves either. Nobility looked down on the merchants and traveling salesmen with open scorn, while soldiers and mercenaries distanced themselves from shepherds in their reeking sheepskins. The few wizards and their disciples kept themselves entirely apart from the others, and bestowed their arrogance on everyone in equal parts. A tight-knit, dark and silent group of peasants lurked in the background. Resembling a forest with their rakes, pitchforks and flails poking above their heads, they were ignored by all and sundry. The exception, as ever, was the children. Freed from the constraints of silence which had been enforced during the bard's performance, the children dashed into the woods with wild cries, and enthusiastically immersed themselves in a game whose rules were incomprehensible to all those who had bidden farewell to the happy years of childhood. Children of elves, dwarves, halflings, gnomes, half-elves, quarter-elves and toddlers of mysterious provenience neither knew nor recognized racial or social divisions. At least, not yet. Indeed, shouted one of the knights present in the glade, who was as thin as a beanpole and wearing a red and black tunic emblazoned with 3 lions passant. The wizard speaks the truth.